Hello friends, it's Shari. Today I have two new Build-A-Cake cards celebrating spring holidays. Of course, my Build-A-Cake cards always need to start with the Build-A-Cake die set and the Build-A-Cake add-on. I've cut a few pieces here and I will talk about those cardstocks here in just a minute. For this first cake, I'm making an Easter cake. I'm going to use the new All the Grasses mini stamp set, as well as the new Stamp and Stencil Easter eggs for the Easter eggs. And I'm also pulling out an oldie but goodie, the extra special Easter stamp set. So I'm going to be stamping and coloring a few of my images, and then I'm going to be embossing on colored cardstock a few of the images. So it'll be a mix and match of different styles of coloring. So first I am starting out coloring my images with my markers. I have all my grasses here that are stamped out and I'm just coloring them all with the same green markers. Just starting with a darker tone at the bottom and blending out with a lighter tone. I'm actually going to go in with an even darker one just to add a little more shading at the bottom. And you can see I have 5 grasses here. I actually ended up using 6. I added another one to my cake when I started putting all the pieces together. This tulip is from the extra special Easter stamp set, and I'm just going to color this in a classic red-pink tulip color. Adding a little shading at the bottom of the petals and then blending out with that R22. I'll come back in with that R35 and just add a little more darkness at the bottom. I also have the jelly beans, which you can see I colored them and I wasn't really happy with the colors, so I stamped them again and I'm going to color them in some different colors. These are also from the extra special Easter stamp set. And I'm going to color a yellow jelly bean. For this aqua color, I pulled out some Olos. And then for that last little jelly bean there, I went with an orangey peachy color. Again, using some Olo markers to color this one, just using 2 shades for each of those. Now this one was a little too light, so I'm going back in with that shade that was my darker one all over the jelly bean, and then I pulled in an even darker one for the shadow. Then I can take the coordinating dies, line them up, and hold them in place with a little bit of low-tack tape and cut them out. Now to move on to my embossed images. So for that chocolate bunny, I have a piece of paper bag cardstock, and you can see I have already treated it with the anti-static powder. I'm going to stamp this in clear embossing ink, and we're going to white heat emboss this image. And I just think this is really fun, especially for this chocolate bunny, because you don't even have to color it. It's already colored with that paper bag cardstock. We are going to add some accents with some colored pencils here in just a little bit, but for now I'm just heating up that embossing powder with my heat tool till it melts and I get that nice bright white image. Before I cut this out, I'm also going to work on my Easter eggs, and I'm going to do the same thing for my Easter eggs. I'm going to white emboss the plain egg image on each of these new colors of cardstock. So I have peach, lavender, and mist. So again, for each of these, I have treated them with the anti-static powder. I'm stamping that egg in clear embossing ink, adding some white embossing powder. I was just cleaning up a little extra embossing powder there before I heat it up with my heat tool so I get that white outline of the egg. So now I've pulled out some matching inks for my eggs, and I'm going to go ahead and cut these out with the coordinating die. I'm going to cut my bunny out as well. And I'm going to use these coordinating inks to put the pattern on my eggs. Now I don't need to use the solid one for these eggs because the cardstock is my base color. Then I can go in with a matching ink and just add the fun details. For this one, I'm using Merman ink. And I'm trying to go in with a very light hand so that these patterns are nice and subtle tone on tone. Look how pretty that is. Next, I'm using fresh lavender for the lavender cardstock. I really love this pattern. It might be my favorite of all the eggs with those pretty little flowers. And I'm just adding a little more to the bottom for some shading. And then finally, for this last one, I have some Peachy Keen ink. I'm just tapping it off inside the lid and going on very lightly with that ink for the tone on tone for this peach cardstock. Now to my bunny, I have my colored pencils. Since I have this on a darker cardstock, those colored pencils are going to show up pretty nicely. I'm giving him a pink bow. I'm also going to color in his ear with a peachy color and then some pink and kind of blend it out. And then I'm also going to give it a little pink nose, a white tail, and then I pulled out a brown and I'm just doing some very light shading around the edges, kind of under that bow, just like we would do with our markers, but just a little bit of shading and really gives this chocolate bunny some shape. Now to move on to my cake. So I cut my cake from some speckled eggshell cardstock and I'm using the new basket weave stencil and I'm actually going to turn it on a diagonal for the cake just because the cake is a cylindrical surface and if we go straight across it's going to look a little funny because it's too straight and it doesn't curve with the curve of a cake. So the diagonal is going to work perfectly and look really fun. And I'm actually using 3 colors of ink. I'm using the same 3 colors that I used on my eggs, some fresh lavender, some merman, and peachy keen, and I'm doing the first layer of that stencil. Then I'll take the second stencil and line it up again on the diagonal, and I'm going back in with the same colors in those same areas. So again, peachy keen in that bottom corner, merman through the middle, and then fresh lavender in the top right. This is gonna give it a fun pastel Easter basket weave look to the cake. And I'm actually going to go in with what's left on my brush and just add a little bit of shading of color to just to kind of knock down that cream a little bit and give it a little more color of the cake. Now before I add the topper piece to my cake, that decorative piece, I'm adding some gold splatters to give it some fun shimmer. And I'll let this sit to the side and dry before I start to assemble everything. For the cake plate, I used some narwhal cardstock. And then for the decorative piece on top, I used some green spiffy speckles paper. I think that this looks fun like Easter grass in the green. And it's going to be a great place for our Easter eggs and the bunny to sit on top. I also used the same spiffy speckles paper for the decorative icing along the bottom. Now I've placed all of my images where I want them to be on my cake and I'm going to start to glue them down. So I'm starting with that tulip there. For the little jelly beans, I am going to pop them up with a foam square so they have some dimension off the cake. And then I can start adding my other elements. So I have those big Easter eggs, and this is where I'm going to use my grass to kind of hide the Easter eggs a little bit like they're hiding in the grass. That one I'm going to tuck behind that one in just a minute. I'm adding one over here with the tulip as well. We have that Easter egg on top. This one's going to lay on its side like it's laying down on the grass. Then, of course, our chocolate bunny, who is the star of the show, and we'll add some grass up to the top as well so that it matches the bottom of the cake. I like that you can tuck these in front or behind, and I love that there's so many different grasses to use in this little stamp set. This one's the one I'm going to tuck behind this egg over here, and the egg on the top up there where I just had that piece of grass, that is where I stamped a 6th piece of grass and added another one, so it was nice and even on the top and the bottom. And of course, we need to add that purple egg as well. And I'm just going to put some glue on the back and tuck this one up there so it's kind of stacked and we get some nice height on our cake. So now let's work on the background. I'm using the largest of these stitch scalloped oval stackables and some yellow spiffy speckles paper. I'm also using the windy backdrop that has that nice stitching detail and I've cut that out of some craft cardstock. So I'll put this on my card base. And then the oval is going to kind of act as a frame. I will layer this right in the center of this craft piece of cardstock, and it will give a nice frame for my cake. I've put foam squares and foam tape all over the back of the cake. That's all assembled now, and then I can just pop the whole thing onto the card base right there in the middle. And then for the sentiment for this card, I'm using that Happy Easter in that really fun kind of scripty font from the Stamp and Stencil Easter Eggs stamp set. And what I really like about this is there is a coordinating die. So I can cut this out. It's going to cut Happy and Easter as two separate words, and I'm going to be able to stack them one above the other. This cake really fills up the card, so I like that I have this small sentiment that I can just kind of tuck over here above the eggs. And I did stamp this on the speckled eggshell cardstock so it matches the color of the cake. Then I'm adding some little guava hearts cut with the Hearts and Stars Skinny tag die. And then finally, of course, we need our glitter. So on this card, I did glitter all the little grasses. I added glitter details to the tulip and the jelly beans. On the eggs, I added some glitter details. I did not glitter the whole design. I added little dots to the center of those solid flowers on the peach one, and then I added glitter to the hearts. And then here is my finished Easter basket card with all those fun goodies you find in an Easter basket, and I just think it turned out so cute. Next up, I'm creating a card for St. Patrick's Day. So I have pulled out a bunch of green cardstock. I'm going to cut the Shamrocks from Algae and Noble Fir cardstock, and then I'm going to cut my cake bases from some green watercolor wishes paper. So you can see here all those pieces. I also cut the tops from the same green watercolor wishes paper so they kind of blend in, and then the details at the bottom out of number 2 pencil, which have that nice gold look. Then I have some scraps of cardstock in a rainbow of colors, and I am going to create some really thin strips to create a rainbow on the cake. So each of these strips I'm cutting to 1/8 of an inch wide. So I have some guava cardstock, some fake tan, sunflower, cilantro, I have peacock, and then I have sugar plum for my purple. And I am just going to add these, making a vertical rainbow on my cake. I am starting kind of at that little edge that it cuts there, but all of that is going to get covered up by the details that go on top, so you don't have to worry about it being nice and straight. I'm going to remove any adhesive that I have with my adhesive eraser, and then I can trim off this excess that's hanging off the bottom of the cake. Then I can take my decorative piece that goes on top, and that's going to act as a cap right on top of the rainbow. I think this is a fun look, cutting the top out of the same color as the cake. It makes it kind of blend in, and you don't have too many colors going on, and I really like the way that this cake turned out. I have a cake plate cut from narwhal cardstock, just like on my Easter cake. And then, as I said before, these little details are cut out of number 2 pencil cardstock, so it's that kind of deeper yellow like a gold. Then I can add my little, or smaller, I should say, cake tier. So I've got the decorative piece on that one as well. I'll add this to the top of the big cake. And then for the little icing detail that goes at the bottom of this one, it's the same die. We're just going to cut off 2 of those little bumps of icing. And we can just add this right along the bottom. I think this is turning out really cute. Now I did want some shimmer on this too. I am covering up the plate with my hand because I should have done this before I glued the plate down. So I'm just kind of masking it, and then I went in with my brush and added that gold metallic watercolor to the icing details at the bottom, and it really gave them the look of gold, which I think is really fun, and they really shimmer in the light when you pick it up and look at it. Just a few more splatters of the gold, and then I will let this watercolor dry. But look at that shimmer. It's so pretty. For my background, I have a piece of the Blissful Blossoms Marigold 12 by 12 paper, and I'm cutting it out with the largest of the outside in stitch rectangles. I just love the B sides of these papers. I think they look like wallpaper. And then for my sentiment, you can see I stamped one that said Happy St. Patrick's Day, but I decided I wanted a sentiment that was a little more generic and could be used any time of the year. So I pulled out my Harold's ABCs. This is one of my favorites because they're nice and small and fit on sentiment banners great. And I'm going to spell out the sentiment that says, "It's your lucky day." And lucky for me, I didn't even have to repeat any of the letters because Harold's has uppercase and lowercase, and I just got to stamp the whole sentiment all at once. I love the alphabet sets because each of the letters are on a rectangular base, and all you have to do is line them up on a block, one right next to the other. You can kind of just bump them against each other, and I like to stamp it just as a test to make sure it looks good. For this one, it looked great. I just decided I wanted to add a little exclamation point to the end, and this is going to fit on my sentiment banner perfectly. And this is a stitch sentiment banner cut out of craft cardstock. I did pull out some sunflower ink, and I'm inking the edges of my background paper just a little bit to kind of define those edges and kind of frame up the cake that's going to be in the center. And I will add this to a white card base, and it's going to have that white frame around all the sides because I use the largest of the outside and stitch rectangles. So I get that thin white frame. Next, I need to finish decorating my cake with my shamrocks. And I'm just going to kind of figure out where I want my placement before I start gluing things down. And once I have that figured out, I will glue everything down. I really like the two different shades of green cardstock for these shamrocks. I picked two that kind of stood out on that watercolor wishes paper a little more, and I love all the shades of green that is happening on this card. I liked making these look like they're kind of cascading down that upper tier of the cake. Then I added my foam squares and my foam tape all over the back, so this can be popped up off of that background. And I'm going to pull in my sentiment strip and just lay it down here at the bottom, just so I can figure out the spacing of where I want my cake to land on that card base. So I'm going to pop that right on there. Then I can add a foam strip to the back of my sentiment. I'm actually using two foam strips here. I'll trim off the excess. And this is just going to go right below my cake, just barely overlapping that cake plate. And then, of course, we need some sparkle. I added some glitter to the details of those topper pieces, a little bit of glitter to all those shamrocks, just kind of kissing the top edge of them, not completely covering them with glitter. And I had a few shamrocks still left because I cut all the sizes because I wasn't sure what I wanted. And so I'm adding a couple kind of tucked here down below the cake and below the sentiment strip. And then I also pulled out some gold gems to sprinkle around as well and fill in on that background a little bit. And I really love how this St. Patrick's Day cake turned out. I love all the green and that pop of color from the rainbow, and I just think it turned out so pretty. So I hope you have enjoyed more Build a Cake inspiration for some spring holidays. I hope to be back with some more springtime cakes soon. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.